Hi, this is Dorie Clark. I am so excited to be here with you and my good friend, Ron Friedman. Ron is, I'm actually going to mute Ron because I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. No, okay, I think we're good. I think we're good, everyone. Ron is the author of this book. It is called Decoding Greatness, and we are going to be talking with him today about it. So excited to feature that with you. And we're going to talk, Ron, about how to reverse engineer success, which is essentially the topic of your book. So, Ron, really excited to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. It's a great opportunity. Always a delight to be with Dorie Clark.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. And if you're tuning in live, please feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you are listening in from, and also any questions that you have for Ron about his book and how to reverse engineer greatness. So, Ron, my first question for you in writing this book, I know that there has been a lot of focus, I guess, in recent years about understanding top performers. Fans of, let's say, Tim Ferriss's podcast. That's always his opening spiel, right? Is understand the secrets of top performers and Olympic athletes and blah 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 blah. Why is it that this has become such a source of fascination in recent years? And what approach did you take in the book? I know from having read your book, which is excellent, that you have a bit of a special sauce in explaining this and really understanding how greatness comes to be. But maybe you can talk a little bit about what your methodology was.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a social psychologist, and as a social psychologist, I've long studied top performance. And for me, it's something that's been going on for decades. And I think part of the appeal for everyday folks is how better to elevate your performance and to understand what people at the top of their field are doing. And that's actually the approach I took for this book. My first book, The Best Place to Work, looked at over 1,000 academic studies and translated them into plain English on how to create a great workplace, so that regardless if you're a CEO, just someone starting out, you had access to all the best science on how to elevate your performance and create a great workplace. But there was something missing in that book. And what was missing is that even within the best workplaces, there's a range of performance levels. Some people are top performers and others are not. And I was curious about what they're doing differently, what top performers are doing differently. And what I discovered is that they're using a technique that few people have heard of called reverse engineering. And, the two big stories that we've long been told about how greatness happens, how people achieve at the top of their field are talent, right? That the idea that we're all born with certain inner strengths, that the key to finding your greatness is finding the right field that allows your talent to shine. The other big story is practice, the idea that if you just have the right practice regimen and you have the appetite for doing lots of hard work, that eventually you'll succeed. But it turns out there's this third story, and that third story is reverse engineering. And it's one that is remarkably common from inventors to artists to entrepreneurs. They're reverse engineering. And all reverse engineering means is finding great examples in your field and then working backward to figure out how they were created. And so it's about finding extraordinary examples, breaking them down, deconstructing them, and then utilizing the insights that you get through that process to elevate your performance on your task.
I love it. Well, I think it makes a lot of sense, Ron. Absolutely, because there are formulas in success and being able to cultivate that. And I think a lot of times the secret sauce is really trying to thread the needle, as you talk about in the book, between what is standard, what is formula, and then what is the new piece that you add to it. So I want to ask you more about that in a moment. But first, I just want to greet some of the great friends who are tuning in here. We have wonderful viewers. Taha is here. We have Janice here. Morgan from Florida, Daudzai from Kabul is here, Christy from Toronto, Joella from London, Deanna from Indianapolis. We have a friend from North Pickens, Texas. We have Linda from New York and Jorge from Mexico, Mulenga from Zambia, Crystal from Cleveland, Roe from UK. So many folks tuning in. We're so glad to have all of you here. Please ask your questions for Dr. Ron Friedman. He's the author of the book, Decoding Greatness. Here is your prop. We can understand how to become more successful. So, Ron, how do we strike this balance then between doing the sort of formula? I mean, anybody who's ever listened to the radio and listened to pop songs knows that there is a formula. There's not like a 25-minute pop song. That's not really a thing, but it needs to be different enough so that
Mhm.
it seems interesting and seems innovative. So how do we actually strike that balance?
Yeah, I love the question you're asking, which is how do we thread the needle? And it's important to thread that needle because if all you're doing is taking someone else's formula and copying it, chances are you won't be successful as they originally were. And it's for two big reasons. The first reason is that that person probably has some level of strength that you may not share. So it could be a particular personality trait. It could be an experience that they had in their background. It could be just their delivery. There are going to be differences, individual differences between you and the model you're copying. And so chances are you're not going to have those exact strengths. But there's another big reason. And that other big reason is that audience expectations shift with time. And so in Decoding Greatness, I give the example of Sir Ken Robinson, and I show you how to reverse engineer his TED Talk. And I do it, I kind of, you can look over my shoulder as I'm doing it. And one of the things that you discover when you look at that very popular TED Talk, in fact, the most popular of all time, is that he is not giving you a great number of facts. In fact, if you look over the course of the entire speech, there's just one persuasive fact. What he's doing a lot of is he's telling a lot of jokes and he's giving you a lot of personal anecdotes. Now, if you were to replicate his approach to a TED Talk, and in fact, I show you how to turn that example into a template, chances are you will not be as successful as Sir Ken Robinson was when he delivered that talk over 10 years ago. And one, because you may not have the academic cachet to just tell a bunch of personal anecdotes over 20 minutes. And the other is because, again, audience expectations shift with time. And so that was a very novel approach when he first delivered it. Today may not be quite as novel. So what you need to do is you need to take the winning formula and evolve it just enough so that it becomes something that is uniquely your own and novel and fresh. And so in Decoding Greatness, I show you how to reverse engineer whatever it is that you're interested in reverse engineering, whether it be a popular talk, whether it's a well-written email, whether it's a best-selling book, and then how to evolve it ever so slightly so that you make it your own. And just to give you one of those formulas for how you can evolve a formula, there's a formula for evolving formulas, is you can combine elements from disparate fields into creating something uniquely your own. So a great example of this is the anecdote I share in the book of how Barack Obama became an extraordinary speaker. And not a lot of people know this, but when he first entered politics, he was not successful out of the gate. In fact, he got trounced his first race for Congress. He lost by a margin of more than 2-1. And so for a while, he was shattered. He had no idea what he was going to do. He was broke. He thought about leaving politics until someone on his campaign team said, hey, why don't you go check out what pastors are doing in the church, how they're engaging their flock. And when he came back to politics a few years later, his speaking style was transformed. He was now telling stories. He was quoting the Bible. He was using repetition. He was modulating his tone. And what I love about that story is it illustrates that Barack Obama didn't go off into the wilderness to find his talent. He didn't practice for 10,000 hours. What he did was he found what was working in a different field and then incorporated it into his field. And so, again, it's about finding the winning formula and then modulating it just enough, often by finding what's working in a different field. And we can all do that to our work.
I love that, Ron. That's a great example. So whether it's a TED Talk, whether it is a political campaign and how to become a better speaker, there are ways that we can learn from people that we admire and who are already doing great examples of what we want to do.
Mhm.
So if you are listening to this and you are enjoying the conversation, please hit the like button and the share button so your friends can benefit from Ron Friedman's insights about how to decode greatness. And also, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We had a great one come in from Peter in Kiev, and Peter is a project manager. He wants to know more about performance and what we can do differently in order to help your team. Now, Ron, I know that you do a lot of work around peak performance issues, and I'm curious, how does decoding greatness we can imagine how that would be helpful to us, but maybe you can talk a little bit about questions of peak performance and how decoding greatness can actually be helpful in a team context as well.
Certainly. So the first step to reverse engineering great examples is to become a collector. Now, when we hear the word collections, we often think of physical objects. We think about stamps, or we think about wine, or we think about maybe books or artwork. That definition of collections being physical objects is too narrow. I can tell you that I know a lot of great designers. They collect logos. I know copywriters who collect headlines. I'm a writer. I like to collect presentation decks. I like to collect academic journal articles. I collect great stories. Having a collection is the first step, because when you recognize greatness, that gives you an opportunity to start deconstructing it. And you do it by playing a game that we all played as children called Spot the Difference, which is that you compare one example against the other and you look for discrepancies. Now, when you have a collection of great examples, whether it be in a project management setting, it could be a well-written memo, it could be a well-written proposal, it could be a really well-delivered talk or presentation. And within a team context, what you can do is you can create a directory, a best of directory for your team, so that people have examples they can look at. And what you do here in terms of spotting the difference is that you're comparing examples that made the collection against ordinary examples that didn't. So by comparing the ordinary against the extraordinary, you can't help but identify the ingredients that went into creating it. And so that process of continuously stopping to pause when you encounter something that's impactful and asking yourself, having a set of questions around what's different around this example and what can I learn from this and apply to my next example. That process of continuously learning, I think, is critical, because I think a lot of us have been conditioned to assume that the only learning that happens at work is when we take the time to read a book, or when we take a course, or we go to a conference. But this is a process that you can incorporate into your day-to-day life that will enable you to learn new skills continuously and sensitize you to the ingredients that make great work unique.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ron. So we're here with Ron Friedman. He's the author of the book Decoding Greatness. It is out now. You can purchase it. They have it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and many other great places that you can check out. And we want to say hi to some of the wonderful friends who are tuning in. Thanks for being here. Isaac from Ghana, Sophie from Boston, Josh in Majorca. Very nice, Josh. Taha's from Turkey. Mulenga's here. Ravi's here from Delhi. Andy's in Boston. We have Ahmed is here. Yamuna from Texas. We have a LinkedIn user friend from Ireland. We have Martina also from Belfast. We have Adina from Romania, Kim in Vegas. Lots of folks tuning in. Thank you so much for being here. And if you're interested in learning more about any of this and making sure you never miss one of the live stream episodes, go to DorieClark.com. You can enter your email address and get a free self-assessment. You'll be added to my email list so you can find out about all these great conversations. Now, Ron, a question that I have for you. I feel very honored and fortunate that in this book, in Decoding Greatness, you actually talk about one of the courses that I've created. It's my rapid content creation masterclass. If folks are interested in learning more about it, there's the URL. They can check it out. But perhaps you can talk a little bit about why you included that and why the rapid content creation masterclass exemplifies some of the principles that you talk about with regard to reverse engineering.
Yeah, well, I've long been a Dorie Clark fan, and I started as a fan. I didn't know you as an author. I wrote you a fan letter, and we've since gotten to know each other, and it's been a great pleasure. And I can tell you that everything that I've accomplished as a professional has in some level been driven by reverse engineering, by this practice of taking great examples, working backward to figure out how were these constructed and what can I learn about this to perfect my next iteration. And that includes writing articles for Harvard Business Review. This is how I learned to write articles. Is again, I just took great examples and I give you very specific systems for deconstructing them. One of those examples, one of those systems is creating reverse outlines. Now, we've all heard of outlining. Outlining is the process of bullet pointing what you intend to put into a finished piece. Reverse outlining is a similar process in reverse, by taking a finished piece and then going back and creating bullet points for what went into every paragraph. You can see the structure, and then you can create a template for yourself for your next iteration. And so this is how I learned how to write academic journal articles. It's how I learned to write articles for HBR and other outlets like Fast Company and CNN. And it's also how I learned to create presentation decks and speeches. everything I've learned, again, everything I've created, even the book that I've written, the proposal I wrote to get my book deal was one that I learned from Sonia Lubomirsky, who was kind enough to share her book proposal with me. I then took it, I reverse outlined it, and that enabled me to write a winning proposal. And so the better you are at understanding what makes something work, the faster you can succeed at at creating that object, right? So in your case, you've created this amazing course that shows people how to deconstruct winning articles and show them how to create their own winning article. And so I love that you're thinking about this exactly the same way as I am, and you helped me, kind of distill it into something that I think is hopefully influential.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ron. That's great. And a great question came through from Jerry. She says, "I have a high need for originality when I write something. This need seems to be in conflict with the concept of reengineering. Can you speak to this, Ron?"
100%. And in fact, this was one of my personal concerns about writing this book, is that people are going to say, wait a second, you're just telling people to copy. But in fact, I'm not telling people to copy. What I'm saying is this is a methodical approach to understanding what makes something work, so that when you're creating something, you're not guessing. Now, we often assume that novelty is a positive, that more novel we are, the more likely we are to succeed and stand out and make an impact. But in fact, what the research shows is that novelty tends to backfire. And it's because as a species, we tend to be distrustful of the new. And that fear extends to how we perceive something that we've never experienced before. Now, there's research showing that what tends to resonate is not the completely novel, nor is it the completely derivative. It's something that is just slightly different. This is research out of the Harvard Business School, and I share it. I share a summary of it in Decoding Greatness. And so if you want to be successful, what you want to do is modify a winning formula ever so slightly. You don't want to come out of left field and do something completely new, because that is going to likely be rejected. And in fact, there are historical examples all over the place of things that were completely new that backfired. In my book, I talk about Radiohead and how after a few albums of producing fairly melodic rock, they went off in a completely different direction. It did not work for them quite as well as the original albums. There are examples of products that have completely backfired because they were too fresh. I have an Apple Watch. I love it. I think it's great. The smartwatch was not invented by Apple. It was first introduced by Seiko and later by Microsoft 20 years ago, and both of them failed spectacularly. And they shared many of the same features. They both provided traffic information and weather information and sports scores. They didn't work out. Why? They were too new at the time. What we needed was the phone to come in the middle. And once we acclimated to the smartphone, we were okay with now moving to a smartwatch. I'll give you another example that I think really hits on this point really in a very valuable way, which is that we often assume that if we study someone else's work too closely, we will simply be derivative, we'll copy their work, we won't be fresh, we won't be original, people won't like us. And in fact, what the research shows, and we have research on this, is that if you look at someone's work very, very carefully, it will make you more creative, not less. And so let me tell you a little bit about this study. This is research out of the University of Tokyo looking at what happens when amateur artists are brought into the lab and divided into two groups. In the study, the first group was simply asked to produce original works for 3 straight days. The second group was asked to produce original works on the first day and on the third day. But on the second day, they were asked to copy the work of an established artist. And what the researchers were interested in is who is more creative on day 3, the group that just produced original works all 3 days straight, or the group that paused on day 2 to reproduce the work of an established artist and then resumed with their original works. And what they found was it wasn't even close. The group that had paused to copy on day 2 was significantly more creative. And it wasn't by simply replicating the style of the established artist with whom they had copied. They went off in completely different directions. And so the question is why? Why would copying make you more creative? And it's because the process of studying someone else's work and then trying to copy it forces us to compare our instinctive inclinations as writers or as artists against the established artist's original work, the work of a master. And that decision-making process that's revealed when you're comparing your instinctive inclinations against the decisions of a master forces you to see all of these great opportunities that are hidden in your work. And so that it just opens your eyes up to all these new possibilities, so that when you do resume your original work, you're actually going to be more creative, not less. And so, as I describe it in the book, rather than simply ignoring other people's work and hoping to be a complete original, we would be far better off by actually studying and better understanding what it is that makes other people successful, because that exercise opens our eyes up to new opportunities that are hidden in our work.
I think that's fantastic and really useful practical advice, Ron. Thank you for that. And a question came in from a LinkedIn user just wanting to know, I hope this lovely talk will be available later on your website. If you are interested in accessing this to watch it again, or if you're tuning in a little bit later and didn't get the beginning of my interview with Ron Friedman, the place to go is actually my YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and type in Dorie Clark, you can hit subscribe to my channel there, and then you will get access. You'll be emailed all of the videos. I do at least one weekly video, sometimes more. So you'll have lots of treats there. So Ron, a great question came in from a LinkedIn user who wanted to know what would be a good ratio of, I think essentially, keeping the classic principles that you have reverse engineered versus adding in the spice of something novel. How do you think about that?
It's interesting because I think it varies by the field. It also varies by your brand. I do think, though, that most of us can't help but be creative on some level. And it's because of our personality and, or our unique backgrounds. And so even if you're trying to reproduce someone else's formula, chances are you are not going to be 100% successful, and you will vary it just enough to be original. And a really interesting story that is along these same lines in Decoding Greatness has to do with Malcolm Gladwell. And Malcolm Gladwell spent years as a science writer before he published any of his best-selling books. I think he wrote for the Washington Post. And after writing for the Washington Post for some time, he then moved over to the New Yorker. And the style with which he had to produce pieces varied tremendously. So in the Washington Post, where he had to write these science articles, they were very condensed. And then he had to move to the New Yorker, and now he had to write 10,000 word pieces. And it's a very different process. And he had to do a lot of storytelling, and he wasn't very comfortable with it, at least not at first. And he found himself having to write these very long pieces without having the necessary skills. At least that was his perception. And so to compensate for not having the necessary skills, he started putting in some academic articles and academic research, and he would write about these studies. And so he would have a little bit of storytelling, then he would have an academic study, and then he would do a little bit more storytelling. That approach became known as the Gladwellian style, which is now populated almost all of nonfiction writing. Every writer wants to write like Gladwell, and it was an accident. It was really an accident. It was his way of compensating for a skill that he didn't feel like he had. And so often what happens when you understand the formula and you're trying to replicate it, you won't have those skills like Gladwell, and you will compensate in some way. And that accidental innovation can actually be really impactful. And so rather than aiming to completely be true to a formula, there is an argument for embracing those deviations that you're forced to make in order to make it come true in some fashion, even if it's not identical to the winning formula.
So good. The forced compensations can be the secret sauce. That's awesome. We're here with Ron Friedman. He's the author of the book Decoding Greatness. Here's Ron's book. You can check it out and get a copy. And of course, if you are not currently following me on LinkedIn, if you want to make sure you're getting all kinds of notifications, just go to dorieclark.com/li and you can follow me there. We want to say hi to some of the great folks who were tuning in. We appreciate all of you being here. Jose from Mexico, Ana Elisa from Sao Paulo, Nishant is here, and Janice. We have Fabrizio from Italy and Michael from Hamburg. We have lots of great people. Ana Lucia from Spain and Franny from Colorado. We have Dee from Harrisburg and Jerry from Santa Fe and Catherine from Lyon. We're so glad to have all of you and more. So, Ron, a question that came in from Kritika, which I think is a great one, is she wants to know, for an idea to succeed, in addition to it being a somewhat novel idea, talk about the timing and and the need for this idea? How does timing, for instance, factor in to an idea really gaining adoption?
It's obviously hard to control timing, but one thing I can say is that often the mistake that we as creative professionals make is by aiming to be too novel, and that tends to backfire. And I mentioned the Apple, the smartwatch is one example. In the book, I give lots and lots of examples of all of these different fields where objects were presented a little bit too soon and audiences weren't ready for them. And what's an interesting example is Lin-Manuel Miranda. Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you'll appreciate this story because I know that you study musicals, and Lin-Manuel Miranda succeeded with In the Heights by taking the standard Broadway formula and adding to it rap and salsa. It wasn't a success right out of the gate. It was a success over a long period of time, and then he modified that formula to the next step, and he added American history, and that became Hamilton, and that's what really broke out. Now, it's a really interesting philosophical exercise to wonder whether he would have succeeded with Hamilton right out of the gate, or whether that just would have been completely fallen flat because it was so original. But he had that intermediate step of In the Heights that then accustomed the Broadway audiences to this idea of rap and salsa in the Broadway show. And so it's a tricky question without question. And I just think that we're better off actually trying to tune down the originality. And I think, again, I think we confuse the idea of creativity and originality. And you don't have to necessarily be a complete original to be creative, and originality often backfires. But I think because we conflate the two, because we conflate creativity with originality, everyone is striving for originality, not recognizing that, again, we as a species are distrustful of the new. And so what you want to do, if you want to be successful, it is to understand what's working and then figure out a way to modify it just slightly.
Fantastic. So, Ron Friedman, we have been here talking about your book. The book is Decoding Greatness. We have been chatting about the principles of how to reverse engineer success. Ron, any final words or pieces of advice for to send our audience out with? If there was one thing that they could do in their own lives to start the process of reverse engineering success, what would it be?
Yeah, well, there's two questions. So let me answer the first one first, which is the final thought. And the final thought is, I wrote this book because I'm genuinely concerned about people dismissing their dreams because they feel like they weren't born with the right talent, or they don't have 10 years to practice and move to the front of the line and be the top of their field. And this approach, reverse engineering, is an approach that all of the folks at the top of their field are using. They're not talking about it. And I think they're not talking about it because there's a concern, like some of the questions we heard today about how if I'm studying someone else's work too carefully, then I'm just going to replicate their work. I'm not going to be original. People aren't going to like me. And I think we've moved away from how education actually happened. And originally, when schools were first founded, is that this is the way that writing was taught, through copy work. This is the way that artists learn to become artists, is they copy the work of another artist. And if we just spent a little less time trying to be original, a little bit more time trying to better understand what those at the top of their field are doing, I think we would succeed a lot faster. If there's one thing that you can do right now, that one thing is to start a collection. Don't just pass through experiences that you enjoy passively, enjoying them and move on to the next one. Make some time to deconstruct those winning examples so that you can better understand what makes them work and how you can apply them to your work.
Love it. Ron Friedman, author of Decoding Greatness. You can get it at decodinggreatnessbook.com or your favorite bookstore, online or real world. Thank you for being here. You can also, if you're interested in these online conversations, of course, please tune in every Thursday, noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 5 o'clock in London. I have a regular Newsweek series where I do great interviews, and you can check that out on Newsweek's LinkedIn page. And it also cross streams to my YouTube channel. So be sure to subscribe there as well. Ron Friedman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.